My sister went on vacation with our parents instead of me. But during the trip, she did something really bad and got arrested. Now, our parents see her for who she really is. I'm 23 years old, and I have a younger sister named Lisa, who's 18. I really think she's super mean. I've been trying to tell my parents this for years, but they never believe me. Here's why our relationship is so rocky. My parents adore Lisa because my mom had a miscarriage before Lisa was born. Losing the baby was really hard on my mom, so when Lisa came along a few years later, she was like a miracle to them. They poured all their love and attention into her, making her the star of our family. Now, don't get me wrong, I used to love my sister when we were kids. But as we grew up, I noticed something. Lisa is really good at manipulating everyone around her. She knows how to make herself look good and make others look bad. It's like she's a pro at playing the victim. Once on my birthday, I got this really cool old pocket watch from our grandparents. It was a special gift because my grandma said it was a family treasure. I was super happy about it. But my sister, Lisa, was clearly jealous and kept asking if she could have it too. I said no because it was a present just for me on my special day. She tried to convince our parents to make me share, but since it was from our grandparents, it couldn't make me. That night, Lisa did something really mean. She knew I was terrified of spiders, so she put one in my pillowcase while I was sleeping. When I woke up and felt it crawling on me, I screamed and freaked out. My parents rushed in, worried about what was happening. Lisa acted like she didn't know what was going on, but later she told me she did it to scare me on purpose. She even grinned about it, which really freaked me out. I couldn't believe how mean she could be without feeling sorry at all. I remember one time when I had a crush on a boy named Mark from my class. I finally got the courage to invite him over to watch a movie with me at my house. I was so excited and even picked out a special dress to impress him. But when Mark got to our house, my sister Lisa ruined everything on purpose. She spilled juice all over my dress and started laughing at me. I felt so embarrassed and had to change clothes while trying to hide how upset I was. Then, to make things worse, Lisa started telling Mark embarrassing stories about me from when I was little. I felt really humiliated. Lisa wouldn't leave us alone the whole time we watched the movie. When Mark was leaving, Lisa told him that he could do better than me. Mark seemed uncomfortable and left quickly. I couldn't believe how mean and sneaky my sister could be. I kept telling my parents about Lisa's mean behavior, but they always excused it because they thought she was just young and didn't know any better. They didn't see her for who she really was. Whenever I complained, they brushed it off and saw me as the problem in the family. So I stopped talking about her bad behavior. Lisa kept being their favorite, while I, who was always honest, felt like I didn't belong in my own family. I focused on my studies and got into a good college. This let me leave home and have a better life. But whenever I came back home during breaks, Lisa made it clear she didn't want me there. She ignored me and wouldn't talk to me. During meals, she avoided sitting by me and would interrupt me when I talked to our parents. She always tried to make me feel uncomfortable. She even messed with my things, pretending she needed to borrow them, but would damage or lose them instead. When I complained, my parents didn't do anything and told us to get along. So I started avoiding coming home during breaks. I made excuses to spend time with my friends' families instead. My parents didn't mind, thinking I just wanted some independence and time away from home. When Lisa finished high school, her grades weren't good enough for college, so she went to a community college instead. That meant she didn't have to move out of our parents' house. These days, I work at a big company in San Francisco, and I really like my job. I keep in touch with my parents sometimes, but I hardly ever go back home. I don't talk to Lisa at all. Now onto what happened. My dad had a really bad heart attack recently, but thankfully he survived. He was rushed to the hospital. When my mom called to tell me, I immediately booked a flight home to be with them. The doctors gave my dad a bunch of medicines and told him he needed to exercise more. Since he got out of the hospital, he's been wanting us to spend more time together as a family. I understood, so I stayed at home for a few days. My job lets me work from anywhere, so it was okay. But I noticed Lisa was really annoyed that I was back. I tried to stay away from her because we're both older now, and I didn't want to fight after what happened to our dad. One morning at breakfast, my dad suggested we go on a family vacation since we hadn't done that in a while. At first, I wasn't sure, but I agreed because I knew it meant a lot to him. Lisa wasn't too excited about it, but she had to go with the plan. Dad took care of booking our flights and where we'd stay. I had already asked for time off from work and told my coworkers not to bother me so I could really enjoy the trip with our parents. But when we got to the airport, I found out my flight ticket was canceled. My dad was confused too because he said he had bought it. After checking, we found out that my ticket was the only one that got mysteriously canceled. I stood there, trying to understand what was happening. I looked at Lisa and she had the sneaky grin on her face, like she always does when she pulls off one of her tricks. I realized she must have canceled my ticket, probably from Dad's computer. I started yelling at her, but she just kept smiling. I told Mom and Dad it was Lisa's fault, that she didn't want me on the trip. But Mom didn't believe me. She said Lisa wouldn't do something like that and that I shouldn't be jealous of her. Dad said it might have been a mistake by the airline, not Lisa's fault. I was so frustrated that they couldn't see what Lisa was really like. There was nothing I could do. My ticket was canceled, and there were no more flights that day. I could have flown the next day, but I didn't want to go alone. This was supposed to be a family vacation. I really didn't want to share a room with Lisa on this trip. I had hoped she had grown up since we last traveled together, but if she canceled my flight, I worried she might have more mean plans for me. Dad was unsure at first, saying we could go back home and plan a new trip later, but then he talked about how he missed going on vacations. Mom agreed, saying I travel a lot for work anyway, so I wouldn't miss much if I didn't go. Their words hurt. It felt like they wanted me to say they should go without me, so I told them they could continue the vacation without me, and they agreed without hesitation. Even though I didn't want the money spent on the tickets and rooms to go to waste, I felt sad that they didn't care if I went with them or not. It seemed like they were fine going on the vacation without me. So there I was, alone at the airport while my parents and Lisa went on their trip. I decided to go back home to San Francisco. I didn't want to stay alone in our family house any longer. I tried to forget about what happened and focus on enjoying the rest of my time off from work. I spent my break catching up with old friends and reading lots of books, turning it into a solo vacation at home. Sometimes, my parents would video call me during their trip, and I could see they were having fun without me. It felt like they didn't really miss me on their vacation. Even though I wasn't too upset about missing out, I still felt left out. It reminded me of how my family always seemed to favor Lisa. I hoped that one day they would see her true colors, and it seems like that finally happened. A few days into their trip, I woke up to several missed calls from my mom, worried that something was wrong with my dad's health. When I called her back, she sounded really upset. She explained that they had noticed my dad's important heart medications were disappearing. It was serious because he needed them for his health. They were in a different country and worried if they could find the same medicine there as in the US. They were really concerned about the missing pills and searched their room but couldn't find them. My mom went to Lisa's room next door to borrow some sunscreen while Lisa was away. She was shocked to find all the missing medicines hidden in Lisa's bedside table. It was scary, so she called my dad. He came and found all his missing medication. I think that's when they realized the truth. Their favorite daughter, the one they called a miracle child, had been purposely putting my dad's health in danger. My mom sounded scared as she asked if they should talk to Lisa about it. I told her not to until they got back home. They needed time to think and gather proof before they confronted Lisa with the truth. Talking to her now wouldn't help because she's good at making excuses to avoid getting in trouble. But something must have happened because my parents must have talked to her about it. Lisa would be let go after 24 hours, and my parents couldn't do anything about it right away. They really wanted to go home after Lisa was released, so they tried to change their flight, but they found out their passports and wallets were missing. Lisa had either thrown away their passports or hid them. So now, they were stuck in another country with no passports or money. I think this was the first time my parents saw Lisa for who she really was. My mom, who always defended Lisa, was now asking me for help because they didn't have money or documents to fly home. She was upset and shocked to realize her daughter wasn't as good as she thought. I told them not to worry, and I would send them money with Western Union, but they had to find their passports first. I was sure Lisa didn't throw them away. Finally, my parents were realizing I was telling the truth about her all along. They were thankful I was helping them, even though they didn't take me on the trip. They said sorry for not believing me. Part of me wants to forgive them, but it's hard. I felt unloved because they always favored my sister. So I'm not ready to forgive them just because they regret leaving me out of the vacation. Update 1. Every day, my parents call me to tell me what's happening, and I'm getting more and more worried. After Lisa got out of jail, my parents told her to give back their passports or they'd call the police on her again. She had no choice but to tell them where she hid them. When they got home, my parents told Lisa to pack her things and leave. They finally realized how manipulative and harmful she was. They were worried she might hurt Dad again by stealing his medicine. Lisa got really mad and started yelling at my parents, saying she didn't want to share them with anyone, especially not me. She kept saying they should forget about me and only care about her. That's when my parents saw how jealous she was and how much she hated me being part of the family. They tried to calm her down, but she just kept yelling at them. She even threatened to make up lies about them to the police if they made her move out. This scared my parents because they're respected doctors in our community, and false accusations could ruin their reputation. Lisa's been making life hard for my parents ever since. When she found out they were talking to me more, she got really mad and broke dishes. She keeps hiding their car keys, making it hard for them to go to work. Just tonight, she had a tantrum during dinner and broke furniture. Then she blasted loud music in her room, so my parents couldn't sleep. The situation keeps getting worse, and it's really stressing my parents out. I'm worried about what might happen next. I can't go home right now because it might make things worse. I'm trying to convince my parents to talk to a lawyer so we can find a way to solve this problem for good. Going to court seems like the best way to protect my parents and make our family peaceful again. Update 2. Lisa got arrested, just like many of you thought might happen. She was causing more and more trouble, and one night she even threatened our parents with a knife during a big fight. It scared them, so they had to call the police. The officer arrested her for assault. With Lisa in jail, our parents knew they had to do something more permanent. They talked to a lawyer who helped them figure out how to make her leave their home for good. They gave her a formal notice saying she had to move out. They didn't want to press charges against her. They just wanted her to go. They bailed her out of jail and gave her the notice. It explained why she had to leave and when. They made sure to follow all the rules so Lisa couldn't argue. Then they went to court with their lawyer to start the process of making her leave. It was really hard for my parents because they were taking their own daughter to court. They felt sad and guilty, but they felt like they had no other choice. Finally, the court said Lisa had to leave the house. If she didn't go on her own, they could make her leave. Lisa will be out by next week. My parents are relieved they're taking a step to get their home in peace back. It's been tough, but they're hopeful things will get better once Lisa moves out. I've been talking to them through all this, and I'm planning to bring them to San Francisco for a few weeks. It'll give them a break from all the stress Lisa caused. Plus, it'll be a chance for us to spend time together, and I want to support them as much as I can. Update 3. I've read through all your comments, and many of you suggested we should check if Lisa has any mental health problems. But since she's an adult, we can't make her go for a checkup if she doesn't want to. Because of her sudden angry outbursts, we don't want to make things worse by pushing her. As I mentioned before, my parents came to visit me in San Francisco to take a break from everything that happened. Yesterday evening, we sat down to talk at my place. They were really sorry for not seeing Lisa's true self all these years and asked for my forgiveness. My dad felt bad for not listening to me earlier. They never thought Lisa would turn out like this and didn't see her real character behind her nice behavior. My mom also said sorry for not taking my concerns seriously about Lisa. She was upset to realize how they favored Lisa over me. I told them I appreciated them admitting their mistakes. I shared some tough memories of how Lisa made me feel all those years. My parents were shocked to hear what I went through alone. They admitted they were wrong and said sorry for making me feel left out. They said they always saw Lisa as special because they didn't expect to have her and thought of her as a miracle baby. They really meant it when they asked for my forgiveness. It was hard for me, but it was a start to fixing our family. We're finally talking about the problems we had for years. I told them I need time to trust them again, and we agreed to work on things together. For now, I'm going to enjoy the time I have with my family while they're here with me. Update 4. We've been spending a lot of time together in San Francisco, exploring the city and enjoying meals. It's been nice to reconnect after all the problems with Lisa. My parents didn't just come here to get away from her, but also to rebuild our family. We all want a fresh start. Right now, Lisa is staying with a friend. We can't just leave her alone, even though she caused a lot of trouble. My parents feel responsible for her, even though she did bad things. We think maybe she has some deeper issues causing her behavior. We want to get her checked by a doctor, but we can't force her. We'll try to talk to her about it when my parents go back home. I don't want to talk to her because she's still mad at me, and I don't want to make things worse for her. I told my parents they should meet her in a public place because of her past angry outbursts. Our main goal is for her to understand our side and know we care about her. We're not blaming anyone. We just want to fix our family.
We can split up if you want, but I want to stay with our son, John said firmly after scolding me. He seemed satisfied as he took a deep breath. As I thought about how to respond, our son, who had been standing by, stepped forward. "Dad, if you don't know, let me tell you," he said, pointing at his father's mistress. Our son's words made me smile mischievously. "My name's Jennifer. I'm 42 years old and work as a freelance artist. I've been married for 15 years and have an 8th grade son. Since we got married, John has struggled to hold down a job. So I've been the main breadwinner, juggling work, household chores, and raising our child. I've had to work from home because John's jobs were unstable, leaving me to care for our son. It was tough at first, but now I have a stable income from illustrating educational materials, thanks to referrals from previous clients. With David getting older, I can work from home and go out for projects a few times a week. So the 3 of us are living together peacefully, but there's something on my mind about John. Despite my steady income, he doesn't seem motivated to find a new job and seems lost. I'm concerned about him being 44 and not having a clear direction. He rarely works full-time, so he should have free time, but he doesn't help much around the house or with our son David. This has been the pattern since we got married, so I've stopped expecting much from him. He doesn't seem interested in David, who's going through tough teenage years, which bothers me. David isn't very talkative, but he sometimes helps with chores without me asking. Maybe he's learned from seeing me manage work and chores since he was young. David has matured a lot, but John hasn't. Lately, John's been coming home late more often, adding to my unease and frustration. It's natural to feel suspicious. Even on days when he's not supposed to work, he claims to have work-related reasons to leave, but I doubt he's secretly job hunting without telling us. There are some things that make me feel suspicious. Recently, John hasn't been spending much time looking after David. He's taken a sudden interest in driving him to and from his basketball club, even though David is just in 8th grade. We have a rule in our household to always drop off and pick up due to safety concerns in today's world. I've always had to fit this around my work schedule, but John started offering to do it lately. While I appreciate the help, something didn't sit right with me. My suspicion grew when I happened to pass by the basketball club one day. I decided to take a different route home after shopping and saw John there, despite him saying he'd be late due to work out of town. He was chatting happily with a woman who seemed to work at the facility. As I stood there, the woman noticed me and asked if I was David's mom. I awkwardly acknowledged her, realizing I hadn't remembered all the staff's faces. I chatted with her briefly, ignoring my husband's tense demeanor. The woman introduced herself as Jessica, but I found it odd that she didn't mention her role with my child. Seeing my confusion, John seemed eager to end their conversation. On the way home, there was an uncomfortable silence between us, and it felt like he was intentionally avoiding me. Despite his seemingly cheerful conversation with Jessica earlier, he walked beside me with his head down, avoiding eye contact. I could sense that something wasn't right. His recent late returns, sudden interest in doing drop-offs and pickups, and strange behavior after being seen with Jessica made me suspect that there was more to their relationship. Could he be having an affair with her? Deep down, I had felt a shift ever since he started taking over the transportation duties. He had become distant from me. That day, when our son returned from the basketball club, I casually asked about his father's behavior, but all I got was a dismissive, "I don't know." It seemed our son was frustrated with his dad's insistence on driving him every day. Forcing our reluctant son to go along with it didn't sit well with me. I had been harboring suspicions for a while now, and it seemed they were about to be confirmed. I was just passing by, so I thought I'd drop in. "David, how are you feeling?" Jessica said as she entered our home. "Thank you for coming all this way, Jessica." "Now please, have some coffee," I replied politely. Jessica, whom I hadn't suspected of being involved with my husband, started finding reasons to visit our home more frequently. She would mention our son occasionally, but it was clear her real motive was something else. Her visits always coincided with the times my husband was home, never when my son or I were alone. Watching them chat cheerfully in the living room confirmed my suspicions of John's infidelity. About a month after I first noticed his odd behavior, he began coming home later and later, sometimes disappearing for days at a time. When I confronted him about sneaking in late one night, he joked about it, but his reaction changed when I mentioned cheating. He snapped at me, telling me to mind my own business and focus on my work. His irritation was evident as he stormed out of the room. I was angry that he acted as if he was doing everything when, in reality, he left all the housework and parenting to me. "What's wrong, Mom?" David, who had been witnessing our arguments, spoke up unexpectedly. "Oh, it's nothing. Why are you still awake?" I deflected, but David seemed hesitant before finally opening up about his suspicions regarding Jessica, whom he believed might be involved with his father. He found her clingy and irritating, especially since she would come to our house uninvited. It was a relief to know that I wasn't alone in disliking her presence, but the situation was far from resolved. When I returned home from a client meeting, I heard laughter coming from the living room. It was John and Jessica. David must have stayed in his room as he didn't join them. As I entered the living room, both John and Jessica turned to look at me. John appeared uncomfortable as usual, while Jessica greeted me with a confident smile. "Welcome back, David's mom." Jessica greeted me as I bumped into John, who then invited me inside. I couldn't shake off the unease I felt about Jessica addressing my husband by his name. "Oh, we seem to run into each other often, don't we? Isn't work keeping you busy?" I retorted with a touch of sarcasm. Jessica replied with a smug expression. "Well, part of my job involves visiting homes." I wanted to lash out at her for being so presumptuous. "What part of your job involves critiquing people's homes?" I wanted to ask, but I held my tongue. Instead, she commented on the cozy atmosphere of our house, insinuating that it wasn't kept very clean. Her sly grin made it clear she was enjoying pointing out my shortcomings. My husband didn't defend me. Instead, he chuckled along with Jessica, even adding that I should do better with the housework since I'm always home. It frustrated me that I was the only one being mocked. Feeling overwhelmed, I quickly retreated to the bedroom, still holding my belongings, overcome with frustration, sadness, and embarrassment. I worried that Jessica might replace me in my family eventually. If she wasn't involved with my son's basketball team, I might have confronted her, but I hesitated for my son's sake. Despite my concerns, my husband and Jessica continued their rendezvous, openly displaying their relationship while I remained silent. People told me they often met under the guise of discussing our son's education. Determined to uncover the truth, I searched for evidence during my husband's absences and discovered plenty of proof of his infidelity. Despite his claims that we couldn't afford gifts for birthdays or anniversaries, I found receipts for motel stays, lavish dinners, and expensive jewelry in his coat pocket. I even found receipts for places he said were too expensive for us to visit. It pained me to think he spent money on his mistress, but not on his wife. Despite my hurt, I stayed composed and continued gathering evidence. Divorce crossed my mind, but I wanted to wait until David graduated high school. Nevertheless, I resolved to gather as much evidence as possible to protect myself. I wondered where my husband got the money for his affair. Even if he used his entire salary, it would be challenging to sustain. Lost in thought, I suddenly remembered our college fund account for David. A wave of dread washed over me as I checked its transactions, revealing large withdrawals over the past few months. I had opened the savings account specifically to secure my son's education funds just in case. It had been a while since I last checked it, and I was shocked to discover that the balance had significantly decreased. Despite meticulously managing our credit card usage and monthly bills, I had neglected to monitor the savings account regularly. The realization hit me hard, and I struggled to steady my trembling hands. The money he spent on his affair came from the savings I had diligently set aside for our son. At that moment, I no longer cared who he was having an affair with. What I couldn't forgive was that he had used the money meant for our child's future for his own selfish desires. His betrayal against me as his wife paled in comparison to the betrayal against our son. Suppressing my boiling anger, I resolved to continue pretending that everything was normal. I didn't want our son, who was at such an impressionable age, to catch on. I chose to shoulder all the problems and worries alone, not wanting to burden our hardworking son with unnecessary stress. However, the strain began to take its toll on me, leading to small mistakes in my household chores and work. Even Mrs. Smith, a longtime client, noticed my worn-out state and expressed her concern. While I struggled, my husband seemed to be enjoying himself with his mistress more than ever. Without my interference, he appeared more relaxed. Sooner or later, our son David would inevitably become aware of the issues surrounding our family. Recognizing my subdued demeanor, David silently offered to help with the laundry, expressing his understanding of the situation. His quiet support warmed my heart and fueled my anger toward the traitor who had jeopardized the money I had saved for our son. There had to be consequences for his betrayal. I contemplated reaching out to someone who had offered to support me, clenching my fists as I swore vengeance against my husband and his mistress. One evening, my husband abruptly announced that he would be away for almost a week due to work. He insisted that he was attending a training program in another state, but I had my doubts about the truthfulness of his explanation. The restaurant chain where he worked only had locations within our state, and there were no offices or branches elsewhere. I distinctly remembered him boasting about this perk when he first took the job, emphasizing that there would be no need to relocate out of state. While my son and I engaged in conversation with him, we both harbored skepticism about his story. My son casually mentioned, one of the staff members from my club is also off work for a week around this time. I don't know if she's going on vacation, but it seems unusual. Going on a week-long vacation requires some cash. Despite our casual tone, my husband appeared startled by our observation. Until then, he had been proudly discussing the rigorous training program he was supposedly attending, but suddenly fell silent and glanced down at his smartphone anxiously. Ever since I became certain of my husband's infidelity, I had been monitoring both him and Jessica closely. I even hired a private investigator who confirmed that Jessica, who worked at the basketball facility, was also taking a week off. I had known all along that my husband's supposed business trip was merely a cover for a romantic getaway with Jessica. While I could have caught him red-handed, I had other plans in mind. I had been scheming since learning of my husband's intentions to travel with Jessica. Naturally, I didn't intend to proceed without my son's agreement, but fortunately, he was on board with my plan. On the day of their trip, I bid farewell to my eager husband, and then my son, and I set about cleaning the house. With the assistance of some relatives who came over, we also began packing. Our plan was to relocate while my husband was away and stay elsewhere until we found a new home, temporarily staying with some accommodating relatives. Upon learning of our situation, our relatives, enraged by my husband's actions yet concerned for David, graciously offered us a place to stay. Additionally, I safeguarded our savings by transferring all remaining funds to my personal account, ensuring that my husband couldn't access it. As we made preparations, I noticed my husband's belongings were still in the house as we prepared to leave. It didn't feel right to abandon his things, so after some consideration, I decided to send them to a specific location. With Mrs. Smith's approval, I arranged for a pickup service to collect the boxes. Surveying the neat and tidy house my son and I now shared, we exchanged a satisfied smile. A few days after we had relocated, my phone suddenly rang, startling me in the midst of our temporary stay at my relative's place. Seeing my husband's name on the caller ID, I couldn't help but sigh involuntarily. "Hello, Jennifer," he greeted me. "Hey, what's going on?" "It's the middle of the day," I responded, already anticipating his request. "Actually, during my training, I ran out of money. Can you transfer some funds to my account?" His voice sounded panicked, confirming my suspicions. No wonder our savings account was drained. He couldn't access any funds. His desperation was palpable, more so than usual. Was it because he didn't want to appear inadequate in front of Jessica? Feeling exasperated, I declined his plea, almost amused by his predicament. "Why don't you use the account you always dip into? There should still be plenty left," I suggested with a smirk. After a brief silence, he erupted into angry shouts. "Are you okay with me being broke?" he yelled, but I refused to entertain his outburst. "Your training will be over soon. You'll manage without money," I countered, goading him further. Suddenly, a frantic female voice could be heard in the background. It was the moment I had been waiting for. Surprised by Jessica's voice in the background, my husband abruptly ended the call. With everything falling into place, the next day my son and I headed to a specific location, a grand mansion with immaculate gardens, clearly the residence of affluent individuals. As if on cue, we found my husband and his mistress in a room. My husband looked terrified as he sat on the floor, offering apologies to someone. That someone, with a stern expression, was Mrs. Smith, a longtime client of mine and the principal of the middle school attended by my son David. Over the years, we had developed a close bond, sharing personal troubles and trusting each other implicitly. "My husband's actions have caused trouble, and I must apologize." I began taking responsibility for my husband's misconduct. It turned out that Jessica, who had been on a trip with my husband, was confronted by her parents about a package she had received at home. She had no choice but to return home immediately. And naturally, she insisted that my husband accompany her. Hearing Mrs. Smith's words, my husband trembled with fear. Mrs. Smith had been deeply concerned about my declining health since learning of John's affair. When I finally confided in her about the affair, and she discovered that her daughter was the mistress, she was devastated. However, Mrs. Smith was determined to make amends for her daughter's actions and had been cooperating with me ever since. She offered a heartfelt apology, gesturing toward the piles of boxes, and sternly reprimanded her daughter. "You should be ashamed of yourself for coveting what isn't yours," she scolded. Jessica's attempts to defend herself fell flat, claiming it was all a misunderstanding and questioning the sanity of the sender of numerous packages to their house. Turning to my husband, Jessica pleaded for support, but he remained silent under my disapproving gaze. With a panicked expression, Jessica confessed that she had no idea her mother worked with me and never intended for her strict mother to discover her affair with a married man. Mrs. Smith is a teacher, and she has very strict rules about what's right and wrong. She's not likely to forgive her daughter for what she did, but I didn't feel sorry for Jessica at all. "I want you to say sorry," Mrs. Smith said firmly. "My daughter has to make up for what she did. Even if it takes her whole life, she has to do the right thing." "Why is this happening to me?" Jessica cried, but I didn't pay attention to her. Instead, I looked at my husband, who was standing silently beside her. "Don't you have something to say?" I asked him, feeling angry. Then, unexpectedly, David, who was standing behind me, spoke up. "Jessica isn't just a regular worker. She's only an intern at the club," David said firmly. "And don't you dare try to be friendly with me again. Your flirting with other men is gross." It turned out that Jessica wasn't even officially hired at the club. My husband always thought Jessica was very skilled and passionate about working with students, which I found funny. It turned out they both had secrets. Seeing Jessica's shocked face, I decided to give her some advice before I left. "Did you know that I pay for everything? The rent, our living expenses, and even David's school fees?" I told her. "John has been doing odd jobs for years, but you wouldn't know that." "Hey, hold on a minute." John tried to interrupt, but it was too late. Jessica was so surprised by what I said that she collapsed on the spot. It turned out John had been pretending to have plenty of money, hiding the fact that I was the one supporting our family. He wanted to impress Jessica, so he made it seem like he had everything under control. He made me look lazy and useless in front of her. Mrs. Smith was devastated when she found out the truth about John and Jessica. When David and I happily returned home, we saw John looking defeated, with Jessica and all their things. Mrs. Smith had kicked him out. Months passed since we moved. Following Mrs. Smith's advice, I hired a good lawyer to handle my divorce. Everything went smoothly, and I felt relieved. I even found out that the savings I had put aside for David's education could be used as child support. As for Jessica, rumors spread quickly at the basketball club about her affair with a parent. She lost her job and tried to get help from her parents, but Mrs. Smith wasn't willing to help. Jessica ended up alone and confused. She left John because he didn't have any money, and now he's trying to make things right. But David and I aren't interested. Mrs. Smith felt guilty for what her daughter did to our family. I reassured her and thanked her for helping me find a new job. Life has been good with just David and me, and I'm proud to be David's mom. David's simple words brought tears to my eyes. I want to keep working as an illustrator, but most importantly, I want to be the best mom I can be for David.